Oh, there you go.
Turn the mic on.
Is that working now? Yeah. I thought that I'm going to share a story with you about hypnosis. And did I ever tell you the story about Neville?
Yeah.
In Sydney? You've heard it, yeah, right?
Have you guys heard the Neville story?
Okay. Well, anyway, we're going to be mostly this next 4 days really learning about hypnosis and learning about the structure of persuasion, how you go about framing things to be persuasive, and each of us have a structure actually, and what it takes to be persuaded, and so persuasion really has a structure actually, and hypnosis certainly does. Well, anyway, mostly when change work happens below consciousness, I think that's probably about the best type of change work really, because it the person's not running into their consciousness for objection to be there at all. So mostly when the mind is like a little sluggish, this is quite a powerful time. When the mind is really sluggish, there isn't many defences there. There's a way to create that a little bit through monotone somewhat. Anyway, I've got this friend Neville in Sydney, and he's a psychiatrist. And anyway, so he's quite a well-to-do hypnotist there in Sydney. And he's visiting with a good friend of mine, Chris Collingwood. And Chris is head of the Neuro-Linguistic Programming Society in Australia. Anyway, so the two of them are there kind of chatting away, and it's about 8 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden Neville says to Chris, "God, gee," said Chris, he said, "Paul just hasn't put the rubbish out." Now, rubbish is garbage in Australia, okay? And this was the only chore that he had asked Paul to do, was to be putting the rubbish out, right? And he had to do that twice a week. That was pretty much the only thing that he had to really do. And always Neville would end up having to put the rubbish out, like at night, seeing that Paul hadn't done it. Or sometimes the garbage pickup would be missed because Paul hadn't put the garbage out. Anyway, so they're sitting there and Neville's going, "I wonder what we should really do about this, you know." So anyway, they drummed up this scheme. So next thing you know, Neville's got Chris to go up into the room, and his son's asleep. And next thing you know, they're starting to blow all this smoke into the room, right? Really filling the room with smoke as much as they can. And anyway, so then all of a sudden Neville rushes up and bursts into the room, right? Into his son's room with a glass of water, with about, this much water in the glass, with his hand over the top of the glass. And he's going, "Fire! Fire! Put out the fire!" Like this, right? And he's looking, his son wakes up and he's looking at his father like this, he can kind of sort of look, and there's a bit of smoke in the room and everything, and he's heard his father say, "Fire! Fire! Put out the fire!" Like this, or and all of a sudden Chris comes up the stairs, and he comes into the room and he goes, "Fire, Neville?" He goes, "What a load of rubbish!" And and then they both left. And his son's standing at the bed, and and his son's kind of he's in trance, right? Can't figure out what's going on at all. His dad's come up and more or less made mention that there's a fire, and then he can remember seeing his dad with this cup of water, this glass of water with just a little bit of water in it, with his hand over the top of it, right? Now, Neville's unconscious mind marked out the word rubbish, because that was what was embedded. He said, "Fire, fire." He said, Neville marked out the words "put out," right? "Put out the fire." So "put out" was marked out, and then Chris came up and said, "Fire, Neville?" He said, "What a load of rubbish," and rubbish was marked out. So Paul's mind, the words was "put out" and "rubbish" was marked out. So here's Paul standing at the edge of the bed. He's kind of in trance, right, like this, and all of a sudden, they hear this stomp, 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 stomp down the stairs, you know. He goes and gets the rubbish and puts it out. And so anyway, you know, they really haven't had any problem with putting the rubbish out anymore. So that's very interesting how the unconscious mind works, actually. One day, a good friend of ours who became a trainer, Robert McCory, you'll see his quote in the neuro-linguistic programming literature that they just put out. He says this is best training that he's done or something. Robert McCory's name is. Anyway, one day we asked Robert to draw his dream, and he drew this long thing like this, right, with kind of just like a round circle at the end of it. And after a while, like mostly, you know, once he'd drawn the dream, we all thought, well, this is an exclamation mark. But it's very odd that this shape would have happened like this. And anyway, he ends up telling a story about a baseball, and this was the first time that he learned that the rules didn't seem to be applying to him in the baseball game, and he really he learned that he wasn't doing very well at baseball, and he learned that he wasn't very good at sport, and he learned that the team of people that was out there were kind of looking at him, and he learned all of these things at this time, you know. But anyway, it turned out actually that this long slender thing with the round circle was a baseball and the bat, and actually it was the drawing and his unconscious mind, this shape, that drew out this story actually from him. So be mindful when you hear slips of the tongue. Quite often that's the unconscious mind speaking. When someone would be counting and saying, and get to 6 and they say sex, you know, that would be an example of that. I mean, there's many, of course, but you can be wary when you hear slips that's unconscious mind coming through. So we're going to go through just a couple of things, and then we're going to open it up, talk a little bit about the vestibular paper and questions that you have on your reading and that, and then we're going to go over the meta model again. Make sure everybody's got the meta model down.
David, isn't the unconscious mind always coming through?
Yeah, give us an example. I mean,
well, I've noticed that, interestingly enough, with animals, I've noticed that sometimes I'll say something or think something, and then, like if I might be sitting somewhere and you're thinking, oh, I wonder if there's one particular situation I'm trying to remember, something about I was thinking about Padma, and then she came to where I was, and at that moment I actually recognized that what I was thinking about her, it had fitted into something else that was happening in my life. It's just like when you say that there's a slip, that sounds kind of like there's this gate, you know, and the unconscious has to slip through it.
yes, because sometimes, of course, the person can be talking about something and be having some other conversation inside.
Yeah, or just
they can be saying, oh, you know, I really want to make this sale, and inside they might be saying something about the way the sale's being made or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so however, mostly the unconscious mind truly is all of the apparatus of self that really is not so much involving language, but really is understanding through, you know, move through patterns of moving through to get something, visualizing something, the visceral feelings and everything. I mean, all the information coming through to the right hemisphere mostly you could call the intuitive or unconscious mind, mostly kind of what becomes languaged, which is what connects us with the external world, is what possibly we're conscious of. Could be coming from a feeling of a colour that's yellow or a colour that's blue, inside actually. That might be at more of an unconscious level.
So anyway, the question that I have is that for me, this thing with the unconscious mind kind of slipping through is kind of a model that's changing. That I see everything now is the unconscious, or it's all the same. I mean, because I'm not just listening to words, that's what it is. It's like I'm seeing the whole gestalt, and that then you could say that's the unconscious, but why is it the unconscious if it's really conscious?
But you see, it is the unconscious because we can only pay attention to 7 plus or minus 2 chunks
so if you give
of information. Everything is there underneath. There's many things underneath.
If you give it a real specific definition like that, that's what you're calling the conscious mind,
right.
That piece of us that can pay attention
what we're conscious of.
What we're conscious of.
Yes, and because there's all of this other stuff that we might not be quite so conscious of.
Well, what about when you start being conscious of all this other stuff simultaneously, or maybe in sequence?
Consciousness, and then yet what is the unconscious is still everything that's there.
Would it be that as we become more whole-brained, instead of having only being conscious of 10%, we're more conscious of maybe 20, 30, 40, 50%?
It's quite possible that, the more that you're entraining this flame that's in the front of the brain and kindling this flame in the front of the brain, that kundalini pathways are coming up from the brainstem and up underneath here and round and over. And the more, in fact, that a person can become aware of, sometimes there's actually more pathways liberated in the brain as a result, and prostaglandins migrate to the membranes of the axons and make the membranes more permeable, makes much more of a thoroughfare for a pathway to occur. And you could really imagine actually that there's a kindling occurring with the thoughts that we have, continuously kindling this flame in the front of the brain, allowing the front of the cortex to also be involved in creating like a whole brain functioning. So someone who's practiced this in life, they're really doing this through interest, truly involving a sense of interest. Somebody who has not done this and then all of a sudden they do this, there can be a new set point happen, and sometimes the person might not feel that they're moving more toward equilibrium again, as dealing with this all these extra pathways that are opening up. And actually you could say that there's a faster, finer vibration possibly that's occurring in the person, and the person is learning to modulate and be with that finer vibration. Right. Mostly whenever this flame in the front of the brain is kindled, it's kindled as a result of learning. These are the major things that motivate. We're going to be handing out a couple of sheets that you can put with the information that you have. Those things that motivate are always involving these four things. That'll involve a feeling of a sense that you're learning. Whenever you are learning something, it requires nothing to be on the outside. People will participate in this over and over and over again, and they'll continue doing it all the way through their life if there's learning there. So there would be no use saying that the filing clerk is motivated in their job. They might not be at all. There may be very few motivators actually in that job. Possibly the job is an idiot's job. I'm not going to say it's an idiot job, but actually it's a person's performing some hydraulic or electrical function, and there isn't anything there in the job where the person's feeling that they're learning. So that hopefully those of you who are creating jobs for others, I really would say to make sure that in the jobs that we create for others, that there's learning somewhere there in the job for the person. So there's a motivator actually. So learning is one. Feeling of a sense of being recognised, and whatever it is that I'm doing, is there a way that I can see how much that I'm recognising myself by what I'm doing actually? Recognition is another one. So learning and recognition, these are motivators incredibly. If I feel that I'm achieving something, that's a motivator. and if I feel that I'm growing, these 4 things are motivators. They'll put an intrinsic generator in the person. So in all the change work that you do, it's really important that you harness one of those 4 things there, and maybe there's a way to harness all 4. You know, to link things that you are sensing that would be excellent for the person to be involved in, and making sure that you're involving some motivators in the person. So what about some behavioural manifestations of whole brain functioning? So when whole brain functioning is occurring, there's a feeling of a sense of flow happening. There really is flow. Actually, the neurotransmitters in the head, when a person's feeling inhibited or averse, that chops up other neural programs. So the person's unable to kind of be in a sense of flow. And there's abruptness and a clippedness to the things that are even said. So when someone's really averse, you'll notice that they've clipped their speech, and they've clipped it right off. You know, there's a little bit more of that. I'm exaggerating it, but of course it's really quite clipped. Whereas when you're really feeling excellent and you're in a state of flow, there's a little bit of slurring occurring, actually, just very slight. So this gives us a feeling that the person's in flow, actually. So flow is one. The tone of the brain. So the brain can go into a phasic inhibitor, go through phasic inhibition, like when you sleep. When you sleep and you lie down horizontal, there isn't any tone like there is when you're standing up, and so the brain doesn't have any more tone because the body doesn't have any more tone. So the person goes more into the right hemisphere. So tonus in the body, the tonicity, do you know what tone is? Tone is the characteristic resilience that my muscles have to stretch, to stretching. So being able to hold my arm out is requiring a degree of tone. And actually, one of the submodalities of creating hypnosis is that you're going to take a person into a different type of tonus. A tonus where if you were standing out, if you were kept straight, you could put your head on the edge of a chair and you could put your heels on the edge of a chair totally. And, you know, somebody could come and sit on top of you and you could be perfectly, like, relaxed and just be in that position without any effort at all. There's a different type of tonus that's being wired in through the brain in this process. There's a voluntary tonus, which is actually my brain voluntarily moving my muscles, actually. And there's another type of tonus where, more or less somebody could have their arm out like this for 2 hours, totally, and for it to be perfectly comfortable there. And we're going to be learning some techniques about accessing this state somewhat. The main thing is when an arm is held out like this person's going out of what's regularly conscious, because when you're doing something a little bit different, out of the ordinary, this is taking a person more into like a trance-like state, out of what's regular. An altered state of consciousness is when the person's going out of what's a state of consciousness which is their general waking state, going into a state of consciousness which is not quite what's regularly the waking state. So you create trance whenever you take a person out of the senses that they're ordinarily using. Let's say that Jenny usually uses her visual auditory self, in talking, taking Jenny more into her feeling senses, how it is that her feet are feeling, and how it is that the cushion feels underneath her butt, and how much the earth she's feeling the earth drawing her into its centre. The more that we would start to use descriptors that are going into feelings, the more we go into creating an altered state of consciousness. But anyway, so tonus is important. We'll be talking a little bit more about tonus. And there's an explanation of this in the vestibular paper too. If the body is very flabby, then the brain, to the same degree, is really flabby. And if there's a sense of tonus in the body, then there's also a corresponding degree of tonus in the brain occurring as well.
Do you mean temporarily, or do you mean all the time in life, or both?
Yes, whenever it is that you go into a state of phasic inhibition in the brain, it always happens as a result of kind of, tonus going out of the body.
So the person was just flabby because he didn't take care of himself, would his brain be kind of flabby too?
Plasticity is a way of coping, just the same as rigidity is also a way of coping. And so you'll see varying degrees of this, subtly out there, and also, sometimes gross examples of this too. So tonicity is important, okay? In the ability for creating whole brain functioning in a waking state, degree of tonicity is important in the body. So it would be no use if there was a lot of tension in one hand, this would also be occurring in the brain, or like a real great degree of plasticity, in one limb. That would be indicating degree of plasticity in the brain. Okay, so clarity, that you have a feeling of want to be clear in communication, really to put the words out there that aptly describe the situation from the angle and the point of view that you're sensing will shed light on the situation.
That's a characteristic of whole brain functioning, is that what you're saying? Are you saying that's more characteristic
What
of
is
tonus?
this clarity? Yes, clarity is.
That's something in addition to tonus, or
Yes,
as a result of?
right, in addition to, and of course it's all a part of too, isn't it? So clarity, the clarity of the voice, and the words that the person's using, and then their frame of reference, how they've come to this, what they've decided to highlight actually. Inspiration. So it's possible that you are totally in your conscious mind tuned much more to the inspirative aspect of the breath. Somebody who's worn out, they've concentrated on their breath out quite a bit. Of course they're breathing in and they're breathing out. The main thing is their consciousness has been tuned more possibly to their breath out rather than the breath in. So whenever you have been feeling, and you're feeling in a state of inspiration, it always is occurring because you're consciously being tuned to the inspirative aspect of the breath. It's quite an amazing thing. You can go a whole week, once you understand this, you can go a whole week and it can be the most amazing week of your life. You can think back in 40 years to this week that you spent in an inspirative state, and you'll remember this week, I tell you. It will be quite a powerful time in life, you'll remember. And also that what you put out there is inspirational. The faculty to inspire creative influence of the future is there in the words that you choose, in the way that we are with each other. Because that's how we value, that's what we greatly value. We greatly value when this person is saying something that really is useful. How many times are you with people who truly are speaking about stuff that's not so useful? Or maybe not even thinking about that actually. And actually, if you're feeling like you'd enjoy relaxing and you can close your eyes a little bit, that's excellent too,
Maybe I have another question.
Yeah. We're going to go through this, and I think then we'll take a little bit of break and then we'll come back to the vestibular paper.
Why, when I do the float, I think when a lot of people do the float, we're in a horizontal position, and yet it doesn't feel to me like that I go into that. Like it's different than sleep. I don't feel like I'm going into like less tone, but it's definitely more in the right hemisphere.
Oh, less tonus, absolutely.
Less tonus.
I mean, very little eventually, because not even pressure on any of the joints, not any degree of tonus actually.
Well, so if that's occurring,
Yeah.
then I also feel like that it's an amazing phenomenon after about 15 minutes of how deep my inspiration becomes,
Right.
and how much I feel that inspirative
Yes.
energy. So are these things, do they go with each other? I mean, can you have that
In other words, in a flotation tank,
What's
there really is a greater ability to be in phasic inhibition, to go into introspection, phasic, to go into introspection. Of course, you can be in introspection and be in a whole brain state.
Okay.
If there's interest. If you were fearful in the tank, then it wouldn't be happening so much. But if you were really kind of feeling excellent, you're very relaxed, you can really be quite in a state where you can be vividly having a three-dimensional world totally. That's what I really would challenge anyone to do next time you're in the tank. See the most intense ultraviolet fluorescent lights and make lettering out of the lights like neon signs and stuff, really, and bring them in real close and move further away from them and actually do some things like that.
With your eyes closed or open?
That's a good one. Yes, that you can't tell whether your eyes are open or your eyes are closed.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
I was fooling with it the other night.
Yes.
I turned into a lizard the other night. I'm just wiggling. And I'm just like listening.
Yes, quite incredible. Yeah.
So we can be in whole brain functioning in any state?
Well, you wouldn't be in whole brain functioning in a state of, aversion or inhibition, mostly.
So mostly in inhibition, you're saying you wouldn't be, but in the float tank you could be if you had a sense of interest.
Yes, whenever there's interest, there's always a state of whole brain functioning is
So the
possible.
only thing that could stop you from being in a whole brain state would be aversion?
Yes, mostly it's aversion which stops people from being in whole brain functioning, right? That's the major thing. In fact, you can go to groups and be with groups of people and they're talking about what the problem is, and they're very hardly at all kindling that flame in the front of the brain. And I think this is very slow and very antiquated.
So you can't get too much pleasure?
What's that?
You can't get too much pleasure? I mean, pleasure, like if aversion is one form of an extreme.
Yes.
And pleasure is a balancing.
Well,
Are you saying that anytime you're right of center here toward pleasure,
yes.
bliss, or whatever, that you're into whole brain functioning? And the further you go that way, the more whole brain it becomes.
It's more likely, yes.
It's like over here, it could be going the opposite.
Yes, because the amygdala, which is around the brain stem, it neuroinhibits the neocortex totally. It just draws information from within the closest to the brain stem, because the amygdala is more or less wrapping itself around the brain stem, and it just neuroinhibits the neocortex. And it neuroinhibits information that's coming through Arnon's horn, which is like a little kind of a rim running around underneath the brainstem, this is like acting like a transducer. It's a steady state transducer. Actually the hypothalamus is measuring the current that's passing through Arnon's horn, and it's getting an analog of the current, and this is telling the hypothalamus to secrete through the pituitary gland various things, that then go into the system, into the endocrine system, that also give information to the body for various things. So, for instance, someone who's interested in accessing a state of analgesic, like an analgesic function, one thing that I might do with a person is have them imagine that they've dipped their hand into an ice cool bucket of water, and so now this is bringing in the neocortex to start to get this patterning, and the person's imagining and starting to feel. In fact, they've dipped their hand into the ice bucket of water, and now their hand is starting to get used to the cold water. And whilst the hand is getting used to the cold water, of course, what's happening?
It's going numb.
Yes.
What?
It's going numb. No.
It's going numb. Because how does your hand get used to the cold water?
You don't feel
It starts to go numb, right?
Yeah.
So now this is what's happened to the neocortex. Now the more that the neocortex is involved in this, the more it starts to recruit populations of cells in the head which start to vibrate, resonate, at that frequency. And if there isn't any inhibition about the feeling of that happening, the information from the cortex comes through the hippocampus, through to the amygdala, straight through into the brainstem, and it affects the whole process actually. Okay. Sweetness is another quality. I bought a few bottles, for some scent the other day just before I left to come here, and I went and bought it at a head shop in New York, because that's the only way I can get these little bottles, right? And I guess they, in these little bottles they sell drugs or something or other in them. Anyway, so the fellow that was across the counter, I could see that he really, truly, there was something going on, that there was substance abuse happening quite incredibly. There was a blackness in his skin, and I would say that unless something happens, he's very young. He may live another 3 years. That's all, and he's very young. And anyway, I said to him, "Would you like to try a little of this scent?" And all of a sudden he asked me, "What is it?" And I was just about to give some to him, and I said, "Oh, it's aged Indonesian patchouli." And all of a sudden he went like that. He really had a reaction. He really had a reaction to the sweetness, and it was quite incredible, the polarization that had occurred.
He reacted to what you said, or to the smell?
He reacted to me saying that it was patchouli. And so then I had a reaction that was the same, totally the same, because what I recognised was there's very little sweetness intensely in his life, and so then I just said that, and I just said, something, bringing some sweetness back into your life here, things really will be cleared up. And I said, I think that's very important, what we just found out. And I just left everything at that, because he was kind of... Yes. So sweetness is a quality, right? And something, butterflies, when you are feeling in this state of whole brain functioning, butterflies and insects and lizards and all kinds of life will come up to you. And even wild animals, with this sense of sweetness, and if you are able to emit a sweet sound, it's like a calling sound, a welcoming sound, all animals are aware of this. This is a level that they're living at, this level. And so you can call lizards to you. I've had lizards come to me and be with me for quite some time out the back here. I've been with people and we've called butterflies, and butterflies have stayed with us for hours, sitting on us for hours. This is like a sweetness.
Can we use something opposite to that to get rid of roaches?
Get rid of what? To get rid of roaches? The only way to get rid of roaches is to make sure that there's really isn't any food for roaches much,
That's their job.
Yes, right. Something, I really love the roaches in New York City. I do.
It's like, oh no, you just left them to stay. I'm like, ready to rinse.
Yes, because they are looking around at us, and they're looking around, and they.
That's why I made a deal with this guy. You can stay.
And sometimes I make friends with the roaches. Even I'll call a roach over,
That's really
give them something to eat,
Roaches don't bother me.
Okay. So now another element of whole brain functioning is integration.
Integration.
So for integration to occur, interest has to be there, because integration is what creates interest is what creates integration.
Does that?
The reason why interest creates integration is because interest creates whole brain functioning,
Creates flow.
and it creates flow.
Clarity.
Mostly, if a person is not involving interest, you'll notice that there isn't much integration.
Or
A
instinct?
person may be congruent, but not integrated.
Subtle distinction.
Yes. Because two people may be being dissociated, right? And both of them congruent.
Congruent with what? Another person?
Yes, person may be two people may be dissociated, and they both may be fragmented, and they are congruent with each other. Okay, congruency is a state that's to do with something being parallel. Okay, whereas integration, the definition of integration is that interest is in need of being there to create whole brain functioning and integration.
Common interest, are you saying?
Interest, yes. Mostly, if there's integration between two people, then it'll usually be because there is some common interest that the both, of you are sharing. The both of us are sharing with each other. And I would say that anybody who is a skilled negotiator, those of you who go on to help in marriage counselling later on in life or whatever, you'll remember absolutely to find out what both parties want and what both of them have in common with each other, what they both want. They share, because this is the platform to spring from, and this is the frame to wrap around meeting.
What they both want.
Pardon?
Looking for what they both want.
Yes, right. Finding out what they both have in common, what they're both wanting. Actually, this is the most streamlined, elegant way to get somewhere. Okay. Another quality is inclusion. What a wonderful thing it is when you are listening to a language that's a language of inclusion. Give us an example of a language of exclusion. It may be, yes, depending on then what I is about, actually. Sometimes this occurs. That would be excluding other times, right? I'm going to come into this place of well-being. That's a language of exclusion, because place is a boundary. This is a geographical location, rather than me having the ability to be inclusive wherever it is that I am, completely, to be included where I am. If I say I'm going to come into that place of being relaxed, that's meaning that there's a geographical spot, in fact, and this is a language of dissociation.
Having the concept of having a vacation to relax, I always felt was kind of creates that too. It's like the person has this boundary, or they go somewhere, or they have to do something.
Okay, so that would be excluding the possibility of relaxing without being on a vacation,
Right.
Possibly.
Right.
Possibly.
Right.
You really want to make sure that it's worthwhile going into the thing itself,
Right.
actually, as far as the language of inclusion is concerned. So what about, there's plenty of books here, and plenty of books out there written by men, and they've written them in a way that's really kind of excluding you if you're feminine, and not so much written in the language of inclusion. Our old religions, pretty much, many of these religions are based on more of a masculine kind of a god, sort of, and it's written in a language of exclusion. So all of my papers, pretty much, there's not a need for gender at all. Many times when gender is used, it can be lifted out. It doesn't have to be there. That way, then it totally makes sense to me whether I'm, male or female. It makes sense to me,
I found it interesting in Bandler's and Grinder's book, Transformations, when they're talking about working with each other as subjects, they always refer to the subject as female.
as female.
Now, it could have been I don't know where the conferences were or the seminars. It could have been actually a whole group of female nurses that was what they were working with.
Yes.
And they are always using the subject as a female.
They do that a lot, and actually they'll change it in the middle of a sentence too, kind of.
Yes.
He did that, didn't she?
Yeah, they like to do that.
And everybody kind of,
Yes, because they're wanting to pace people as much as they can. And I think that doing this, at least people are aware that they're aware of the use of gender. And I would say that for each of you, that you have the ability truly to develop rapport with the person that you're with, that you are mindful of the use of gender, in fact. Yeah. And mostly, you know, what you say truly makes sense, whether, you know, we're female or whether we're male, and there's not so much importance on making the distinction, except if there is something which really is a distinction. So one day a friend of mine asked me, said, well, why don't you take the men off and go over there and do a men's circle? And why doesn't Annie take the women off and go and do a women's circle over here? Now this person was like a medicine man from Canada saying this to me. And then I said to this person, well, what would the women think of me then? Would the women see me then as a man? You know, because mostly what I had done was being mostly androgynous, more or less, and being spoken that, you know, that you are people and I'm a person and I'm coming from this level. And that the act of doing this would be an act of showing that I'm separate. And I wonder about the value of all of this, actually, when this is occurring. But anyway, whilst people are thinking there's value there, well, I think that's, you know, fine. But I think mostly that there's quite a bit of this in the world, and I'm not going to lend myself too much to that. But I much prefer to lend myself to something that's involving more inclusiveness.
Well, David, would you say some more about that subject as it relates to, I guess, places, and you said somewhere,
The subject of
being exclusion.
Okay, other words are only, just, sometimes.
I'm just doing this.
Yes, right, that would be really excluding like quite a bit, and actually it's exposing deep structure. Something else is going on. When I would say, I only want to get to this point, right? Yes, you would recognise there's something else going on there as well, actually, and that I have spoken a language of exclusion because there's something else there as well. I've kind of spoken in a manner that splits things. So, pardon?
Better, all comparatives.
Comparatives, can create excellent. Comparatives can also create exclusion. Like you're looking better today, you know. What is that excluding? What is that excluding? You say, oh, you look much better today, right? What's it excluding?
How did I look yesterday?
Yes, the possibility that it didn't look really excellent yesterday. Possibly, right? It's excluding that. Or it's involving that in the language.
I kind of like them that they really look awful.
That's right. I heard Nancy say to her dad, Tom, after he came out of the session with Ned, naturally you would think that someone would feel excellent after coming out of the session with Ned. But anyway, Nancy says to her dad in the office here, oh, Dad, you really look good now. You know, and Dad was in the office and he was thinking, oh my God, I must have looked really good yesterday or something, you know. And everybody else was in the room and I could see him kind of wriggling just a little bit. And then he said to Nancy, well, what do you mean? How was I yesterday or something, you know? I just chuckled to myself inside because I kind of knew what it was, you know. Mostly we're truly understanding everything inside, and we're learning how to articulate that, you know, so that we're aware of this now, okay, when you're with people, so that you're able to coach and have a degree of like mirror-like wisdom, you know, when you're with people.
Well, it's interesting. Some people will look in the mirror and go, oh wow, what did you do to me? You know, and there's no judgment there other than they know they've changed.
Yes, they're looking really good.
The face is more relaxed or something.
Yes. Well, actually, if you said more relaxed, well, sometimes you can really put more in there. But to say that you're looking relaxed, you look really excellent, how you're feeling, you know, that's not comparator, using comparisons with yesterday or where the person's been.
Well, they're just conscious of change.
Yes, actually, so that's using language of inclusion would be very important working with the client this way, because it paces the person to have this and to let that be pervasive throughout everything rather than only a moment. And allow the person's mind to sense that this truly is pervasive and connecting with everything that they are. Okay, so a language of inclusion. So comparators create exclusion. What else creates exclusion? Universal quantifiers.
Time.
Always.
Any reference to time, not always,
Yes.
but a lot of times.
Verb
it can-
tense.
Yeah.
How can verb tense be excluding? How can verb tense be excluding?
Well,